World War III had turned the planet Earth into a burning hell. Nuclear bombs turned major cities to ashes, and radioactive radiation threatened every living being. The only survivors were those who had sought refuge in the underground shelters in time. These individuals were almost part of the wealthy class of society, as they had enough money to gain entry into the shelter. This shelter, known as Shelter 69, was a vast underground city with artificial hospitals and schools. But life in this dark and limited world was never pleasant. After several generations, many of the inhabitants of the shelter lost their lives due to unknown diseases and a lack of resources. The orphaned children who had been separated from their parents or had lost them grew up in a large orphanage. The leader of the shelter was a powerful man who used these children as cheap labor. Boys were forced to do hard labor in the orphanage until the age of 18, after which they entered a quasi-military camp that Chaos had named the Black Camp. In the dark semi-world, orphan boys were turned into skilled killers to prepare them for leaving and finding the necessities of life in the shelter. But no one knew what would happen to the girls who reached the age of 18. They seemed to disappear. In these conditions, everyone had to follow the rules, which perhaps maintained order in the shelter, but the most important point was the survival of Chaos's leadership in the shelter. Among the children working in the orphanage, 2 children were different from the others. They were siblings named Elian and Alice. Their world was limited to concrete walls and fluorescent lights, and their days were a monotonous repetition of waking up before sunrise, working in underground fields, and eating tasteless food. At night, they took refuge in old books under the flickering light of an oil lamp. They had seen nothing but this shelter since childhood. The stories of their grandmother about the outside world, with green trees, blue skies, and sunlight, were nothing but unattainable dreams. However, Eliam was very afraid for his sister's fate. He was tired of this life and wanted to escape from this cage, to see the outside world with his own eyes and save his and Alice's life. Eliam had dreamed of escaping since childhood. He listened to his grandmother's stories about forests, seas, and the blue sky. These stories had created an endless longing in him to see the world outside. One day, while working in the fields, Eliam noticed the strange gaze of the guard. The guard, who always treated them with violence, had a different look that day. The look was filled with fear and cruelty. That night, Eliam made his decision. He had to escape from this hell. Eliam carefully designed the escape plan. He knew that the only way out was through the underground tunnels, which were used for transporting water and food. Alice, his younger sister, who was very dependent on Eliam, walked alongside her brother on this path. Night fell. Eliam and Alice cautiously left their room and moved towards the tunnels in the darkness of the night. Their hearts pounded loudly and their legs trembled with fear. Every sound of the guard's footsteps, every small rustle in the darkness made their hearts quake. With each step they took, fear enveloped them. But the hope for a better future gave them strength. After hours of walking through the tunnels ahead, they reached a large iron door. Knocking on the door with all his strength, the sound of the knocking echoed like an alarm in the silent and deadly atmosphere of the guard's shelter. They quickly approached the door, and from the sound of their footsteps, it seemed to echo throughout the tunnel. Eliam and Alice had to escape through a small sewer opening. In the outside world, the air was filled with dust, They were passing through the ruins of the city. The tall, broken buildings reminded Eliam and Alice of a bitter past. After several hours of running, they could no longer move, so they decided to rest in an abandoned house nearby. The sun had not yet risen when suddenly, in the dark of night, Alice quietly heard footsteps. Shade, the hired killer by Kaios, was pursuing them with a sense of dread and fear in his heart and soul. Shade was a man with cold, lifeless eyes. He had been working for Kaios for years and had sent many to their deaths. Shade approached them with a sword in hand, still stained with blood, as he approached with caution. The light of the rising sun illuminated Shade's angry face. Eliam fought with all his strength against Shade. Shade was stronger, but Eliam would not give up. He fought to save his sister. At that moment, Shade's gaze fell upon Alice's frightened eyes. For the first time in his life, doubt arose in his heart. Why had he fought only with adults until now, and had nothing to do with children? But it wasn't long before Eliam grew tired, and in this unequal battle, he faced defeat. He had neither sufficient martial skills nor a weapon to fight. His only weapon was an iron rod he had found in the ruins. Ultimately, Shade intended to complete his mission of killing the brother and sister. He raised his sword, and at that moment, Alice's screams echoed in his ears. At the same time, he saw his reflection in the sword and hesitated as he was filled with doubt.